we can just do what we can right here. And so churches are one of the largest landholders of excess undeveloped land in our state. Could we perhaps incentivize a church who's sitting on a piece of undeveloped land for the last 20 years, not really sure what to do with it? Could we incentivize them to contribute a portion of that land towards an affordable housing project that just makes it slightly easier for that developer to bring something to market for families that are living at 30% of area median income? Well, the answer to that question is yes. The bigger challenge is, how do we do that at scale? How do we do that statewide? How do we do that, in a whole region? Like, somebody else has got to figure that out. But I think that, like, if we can just start thinking about, like, what can I do now with my group of people, a group of partners in a specific neighborhood, then I think we actually, in my experience, we've started to see some real needles move. So I do think that there's opportunities to be encouraged by doing small things, even if at large, at the national level, it can be hard to be positive about some of these challenges.
One of the ideas that came out of a conversation with you and some other folks, and it may have been your idea or somebody else's, but was, all right, the church has all these resources used on Sunday. One of the biggest problems, including with me, my family, my siblings, is we need safe daycares. Mm-hmm. We need safe places that we trust to leave our kids.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, where we discuss how to buy, grow, and eventually sell your business to serve your personal and wealth goals. I have a really fun guest on today, Stu Davis, who's a tremendous friend and the leader of an organization called COSILoveYou, an organization that I think is one of the greatest nonprofits in Colorado, focused on uniting the city with all the resources of the church and the business community. You're a dear friend, and I think you're just an incredible leader, man. So welcome to the show, Stu.
Gosh, thanks. That is an introduction I hope to live up to someday.
Well, hey, we always start with the story, and I just want to hear your background, how you got into what you do, because what you do is very unique. You're really good at it. But tell us the story and kind of how COSILoveYou was launched and where it's heading right now.
Yeah, I mean, like anybody's story, it's longer than shorter, so I'll try to keep it brief for the podcast here. But I think in short, I mean, I began my career in higher education years ago when I came out of college myself, but then moved to Colorado in 2004 and spent about 10 years on staff with one of our city's larger local churches, and really spent about a decade just trying to work with families, a lot of teenagers. I was the director of our student ministries team for the majority of that time. And so really was kind of, I mean, in many ways, I was kind of heads down on, what was happening in our community. I was pretty unaware. I was just thinking about what was happening with the hundreds of kids that were a part of our ministry and their families. And it wasn't until 2014 that I found myself coming onto the staff of our local rescue mission here in Colorado Springs, which is called Springs Rescue Mission, on the front end of what was really a season of incredible growth. And there was a strategic plan that involved kind of the city of Colorado Springs trying to get its hands around a growing and very visible homelessness crisis. I had done a lot of work during my 10 years as a pastor over in a specific community in southern Swaziland, which is now called Eswatini. I still call it Swaziland because that's what it was called when I was there, which taught me a lot about poverty in a developing world context. And then when I started kind of getting involved with homelessness and poverty and addiction recovery in my own city, I realized that the details, the surface looks different, but so many of the underlying principles around poverty and homelessness are similar across lots of different geographic contexts and cultural contexts. And so what we really started to build was a platform in our city for churches who were trying to wrestle morally with the idea of homelessness and poverty and what do we do about people who are struggling, businesses who were trying to respond compassionately to people who were struggling, but also trying to keep an eye on how do we operate a viable business in our city that is being impacted by a growing homelessness issue, and our city leaders who are all trying to figure out, like from a policy level, a public safety level, an enforcement level, how do we try and approach this with, again, a balance of kind of dignity and humanity, but also kind of fair policy. And so everybody was kind of all asking similar questions. They were just coming at the problem from different angles. And so what we started to really kind of do without really any real purpose or intention, in other words, there wasn't a driving philosophy. It was just to say, if we all care about the same thing, can we just get around the table and try and figure something out together that we oftentimes are trying to figure out separately? And so over the next 5 years, we really started to see this opportunity for what now I would now call, and now have a term for, called collective impact, where you've got leaders, expertise, resources from these different sectors all coming together to try and work in partnership with one another to say, hey, you've got access to this pool of resources, we've got access to that pool of resources. What does it look like for us to blend them together? And so the long story short, over 5 years, we started to create this engagement platform whereby these different sectors could work together to address homelessness in our city. And long story short, it worked. We didn't eradicate homelessness in Colorado Springs, but we became one of the few countries in the nation that had a growing general population and a declining homeless, unsheltered population. So we didn't have any magic pills. We didn't have like some specific plan that was, kind of novel. We just kind of created a platform, invited people to participate in it. And that really was the beginning of Because I Love You. What we started to see was that there's opportunities for us to do that kind of work beyond just homelessness in our city. And so
let's pause there, though. Let's pause
there
real quick before we start talking more about the launch of Because I Love You in future. So what are the ingredients? No, I love it, man. I love it. That's really good. I think there's just a really important thing I want to touch on, which is collective impact. Let's dig into that more. What are some of the ingredients that made what you guys did successful in Colorado Springs? Because I think it's a great concept and probably really hard to pull off.
It is, you're right. Both of those things are true. It's a great concept. It is hard to pull off, and we're not perfect at it. I think the idea of collective impact is acknowledging the fact that people might be coming at any specific challenge from a different motivation point. But why you're coming to the table is less important than what you're bringing to the table and your openness to bringing those resources that you have access to alongside and in partnership with the resources of others. So in other words, it's less about why we're trying to solve the problem than what we're trying to solve and how we're going to solve it. And I think that's really the important ingredients around collective impact. And a lot of people get hung up on the why. And I get it. It's important, especially if you're a person of faith and there's somebody at the table who maybe kind of sharply disagrees with your faith proposition, or maybe you disagree with that other person's lack of a faith proposition. It's pretty easy to get hung up on that. But if we continue to get hung up on those things, then everybody's just going to be trying to build a kind of attempts at solution in their own silos. And we've just seen that not happen. It's not been a solution for far too long. So
Gotcha.
That's the idea behind the collective impact.
I have another question. So we're a capitalistic society in the U.S., which would say that if given time, the private market will solve the issues. If government is in its proper role, they will be part of the resource. But generally, the private citizens will figure out and say, hey, homelessness is a problem. We need to create a Because I Love You. We need to resource it. We need to make sure these people have the resources and they also are following the law. How have you balanced that? And I asked this question in a leadership group I was in last week. How have you balanced more of that kind of free market capitalistic view with faith? Because you and I are both believers, and that's a tough thing because Jesus maybe did things a little differently. I don't think he was necessarily a capitalist, but I think there's a lot of things that both of those viewpoints are useful. So how would you reconcile kind of the emotional faith-based, hey, we need to serve, we need to love others because they're created in the image of God, with also that pragmatic approach of, are we resourcing it the right way? And is the government taking resources that the private market should be using to resource this more effectively? Anyways, that's a big question, but I'm curious to your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts, so I'm going to try and organize them hopefully organize them relatively well. I think one thought is we can work within the system that we wish we had, or we can work within the system that we have. And I think there has to be, we have to kind of keep pushing forward toward the system that we think works the best, while also working within the system that we've got. And so right now, the reality is at the government level, policy, funding, infrastructure, those are things that are delivered by our government. How much policy, how much funding, how much infrastructure should be delivered by them, it is, I think, up for debate. And you and I have a lot more agreement than disagreement on those kinds of things. But until those things start to change, we've got to be able to recognize that the government is directed to provide funding for social services. They're directed to provide infrastructure so that there isn't discrimination amongst who receives goods and support and who doesn't, and those kinds of things. So I think in some ways, like what we're trying to do is work within the infrastructure or the kind of the environment that we have. And hopefully at some point we get better at it. The government gets, kind of more refined in terms of acknowledging what it can and should be doing and what it can't and shouldn't be doing. Until that day comes around, we've got to work within it. I think the other thing that I would say is, we do have a lot of resources. And I don't just mean that financially. I mean people, expertise, energy, compassion, all kinds of things that come out from the faith community, from the church. Mm-hmm. But they're never going to be fully adequate to address any social ill, any evil, any challenge, any serious and complex crisis. It's going to need partnership from the nonprofit sector, who are experts in many ways. It's going to need partnership from the government, who is, at least in our current reality, like I just said, kind of providing a set of resources to solve problems. And so what we've got to acknowledge humbly as people of faith is to say we've got a lot to offer, but even with everything on the table, we can't solve it all. We've got to have these partners. And so I think those are the couple of things that I think we're kind of trying to constantly remind both our church partners, like you can do a lot, but you probably can't do everything. Mm-hmm. And as much as you wish this was only your problem to solve, or that the government would just let the church run it, or let some group of people, or let the business community solve it, we've got to have like everybody at the table. It's just the reality of the world in which we live.
I love that, man. I think a mental model that you shared with me that has been really useful when I think about social needs is most of these will never be solved. They will just be resourced correctly or well, maybe not even correctly. Like, how do we resource these problems well? Kids that maybe don't have great parents and come home and, don't have a great home environment and maybe aren't getting the food and nutrition. How do we resource that well? Homelessness, how do we resource that well? Drug addiction. And so I think that model helped me a lot to say, hey, our job is not to solve these problems. These are societal problems that will continue long after we're here. But our job is stewardship, I believe. How do we steward our piece of whatever that equation is really well and resource that well? And I think we're doing a great job, man. I heard a stat, and I don't know if this is true, but some dear friends up in Colorado, up in Denver said that Denver has spent $400 million over the past 1 to 2 years trying to solve homelessness, and it's been a total failure. And I think that's where government kind of gets out of control and starts just throwing our money. It's our tax money that we've, entrusted them with towards a problem without maybe bringing in the correct mechanisms like we've tried to do in Springs. So anyways, I'm very optimistic, and I think you guys are a great leader in that space. So tell us more about what 'Cause I Love You does, because I think it's a model that's useful for any city. So tell us a little bit about what you guys do and what's worked.
Yeah, I think what we try to do is kind of two connected things. One is try to get churches that are across this kind of spectrum of faith to work together to kind of build partnership around whether it's a common cause or a neighborhood that like 4 or 5 or 6 churches might commonly, be meeting or gathering in, or some other kind of common connection. We try to get them to work together. And then more than that, work together with others in our city. So the business community, we talk a lot about kind of the 4 sectors: business, church, nonprofit, and public sector partnerships. And so the reality is that, and some people just, they'll say 3, other people will say more. But I think those four kind of cover the gamut of organizations that we have in our community. And so when we can get churches who maybe sometimes, again, separate themselves or subdivide themselves based on like some finer things that the broader community doesn't really care about, like how we do baptism or how we parse out the teachings of Scripture and, all those kinds of things. The broader community doesn't care about that. The church kind of subdivides itself along those ways. But if we can just say, hey, listen, some of that stuff is probably really important to you. It's maybe just not primary, or it's maybe not the most primary thing about solving education or domestic violence or the foster care system or whatever it might be. If we can get them to work together around an issue that they commonly care about, and then bring themselves come to the table with our other sector partners and say, man, the business community has a lot to offer to this. They provide metrics, they provide reporting, they do all these dashboards that the faith community doesn't do very well. What does it look like to adopt kind of that idea? Some measurement. We also have partnerships with, the government sector and the nonprofit. Like I said, the experts in the room oftentimes. If we can get them all four sitting around the table, around some challenge, some issue, it could be macro level, like affordable housing or mental health. It could be micro level, like public safety in a specific neighborhood. But if we can get them all sitting around the table together, then there's a real opportunity to be able to move the needle on one of these issues or on multiple issues. So that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is kind of building this platform. Sometimes it's digital, a lot of times it's interpersonal, of trying to connect leaders one to another to say, you care about this, you care about this, you care about that. Let's get around the table and see if we can figure out what we can collectively do to resolve this issue. So we do that across like 14 or 15 different kind of crisis areas. We're working right now on trying to build out a dashboard for how we demonstrate both the current reality and kind of the future vision of some of those needles we want to move. But a lot of times it involves building trust. And so we do spend a lot of time, talked a little bit about our events. We spend a lot of time creating some big and small events that get some of these people in a room for the sake of looking eyeball to eyeball and saying, even though we look at this problem differently or we come to the table from different motivations, you're a person, I'm a person, we've both got resources, let's work on this together. And I think when that trust happens, people start to see movement. Movement builds trust, and trust builds movement. And so it becomes this kind of upward cycle.
I love that. So let's camp on the concept of the table. I think that you've said it about 5 times, and I think that's so critical to understanding how to set the table. So talk to us a little bit about this. You bring all these people from different backgrounds, nonprofits and business owners who are probably a little pissed off about this, faith leaders who are probably a lot of faith and maybe not a lot of action sometimes and a lot of accountability, government, you bring all these different personalities and you set a table. How do you create an environment where you can start building that trust? And also, what are some of the things you guys have done to take, because generally what happens is people get together and they're like, we have all these great ideas, and then they leave and nothing happens. So tell us a little bit about how to set a table as a community, and then how to take kind of that trust and actually create some action.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm a huge fan of listening first. Listening as a posture, listening as kind of an internal posture, and then kind of an external action. This goes back to, I made a short reference to some of the work that I did in Swaziland, now Eswatini. The short story is, I just spent about 10 years, instead of me coming in as a white American and kind of looking across this landscape of an impoverished community and saying, oh, I think they need a water well, I think they need a school, I think they need a church building or whatever it might be. I just stood back and said, ask the community elders, what do you guys think you need? You live here every day. What is it that you see across this kind of desolate kind of parcel of land? And they saw bigger dreams than I ever would have had. They saw things that, they saw a future reality for their community that I never would have dreamed of. And then it just became my job to be a partner in helping bring that reality about. But if we hadn't taken the opportunity to listen and kind of adopted this approach of listening first, we would have built a whole bunch of things that 10 years later would be completely useless and inaccessible. So I think bringing that into kind of our community context here in Colorado Springs, if we can, for instance, and Chris, you've been a part of these gatherings, kind of bring church leaders into a room with city leaders and say, hey, church leaders, I'm sure you've got a lot of things that you think are really, really important that you would love to tell our city elected officials about. But we're just going to ask you to sit down and just listen. We're not going to pass the microphone. We're just going to give the microphone to our mayor or to our city council member or to the expert in the room around a specific issue, the superintendent of schools. We're just going to let them talk. And then you get to like sit around a table and say, hey, what did you hear? This is what I never knew about that. I never met that person. I've actually read about them in the paper, but this really changed my mind, being able to just sit in a room and have a conversation with my city council member or the superintendent of my kid's school, the school district or whatever. So when we can embrace that posture of listening, I think it really demonstrates to, especially for those of us in the church, it demonstrates to our city, to our community leaders, that we're serious about hearing what they think is important and then giving us an opportunity. Then we take the opportunity to actually respond to the actual need, not just the thing that we think is needed. So I need to kind of like trademark this. I don't know why. I just keep saying this over and over again, that a misidentified problem will always lead to a misapplied solution. Mm-hmm. And I think too often we misidentify problems because we're just not listening well. We read an article in the paper, we saw some data set on a website somewhere, and we thought, oh, I can do something about that. I'm going to approach my local school and say, hey, your math scores are really low on your website. I've got this great math tutoring program. But the reality is that we've never taken the time to listen to the principal who says, we've got great math teachers. Our kids just don't have safe places to learn after school is done. What we really need is just a safe space for kids to just do their math homework. So, I mean, like, that's just one of a billion examples I could give about how when we listen well, it creates the kind of infancy for trust to happen. And then when we've listened and we've identified a problem, we might have to acknowledge this might not be the biggest problem we could take on. It might not be the thing that's going to most dramatically shift the issue, but maybe there is one thing that we can all see ourselves as partners from those 4 different sectors working together on to say, let's just start. Let's start with this. Let's see what happens. Let's experiment. Let's pilot something. And if it works, maybe that gives us the opportunity to start taking on something bigger or something else. And that just kind of starts again to build that wheel of trust that just continues to spiral upward, like I said.
I love that.
A question that we love to ask our potential clients is, do you know what your business is worth? And if you sold your business today, would it fulfill your personal and financial goals? If you're a successful business owner, but you don't know when or how to sell your business, and if you've ever wondered what each additional day in your business is actually costing you, we'd love to chat. If you're ready to spend more time with your family, your friends, or traveling, come sit down with our team, because when you work with exceptional business advisors, we'll help you build a blueprint to sell your business successfully and help you create, capture, and achieve your dream life. Don't wait for the right time. The time's now. Go ahead and scan the QR code or book a discovery appointment at excoadvisors.com.
So I don't know how many conversations you have a week, but it's a ton. You know everybody knows you. What are some of the things that are coming out of our community and maybe even trends as a nation that are encouraging to you? Some of the things that you're like, man, I think there's some great things happening in the next, 1 to 5 years that are coming out.
Well, I think right now it is it's kind of easy to feel a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic right now, personally at least. Like there's a lot. I mentioned homelessness. 10 years ago, we did a lot of things that really moved the needle, but it's such a dynamic and complex set of issues that we as a city are trying to have to go back to the table and figure out, hey, like what we did 10 years ago worked well, but it's not working anymore. The dynamic is shifting, everything from mental health, addiction issues, housing shortages, like all kinds of the economy, the state of the economy. Those things are all having effects in ways that were not true 10 years ago, pre-COVID. So homelessness, I think education is a huge both opportunity and crisis. I mean, you talk about the impact. I don't think COVID had a bigger impact on an industry than it did on education. Mm-hmm. And I think the ripple effects of, kids who are in elementary, middle, and high school will just continue to kind of come to the surface for decades to come. But it also just fast forwarded the educational kind of process and cycle and system by 10 or 15 years in ways that we just weren't prepared for yet. So there's just so much opportunity and crisis in our educational system. I think right now in our local economy, this is certainly true in other cities around the country. Frankly, the majority of growing cities around the country are facing affordable housing issues. And that's related to land, it's related to cost of materials and labor, it's related to, kind of market pressures and, all kinds of kind of these macro level issues that are really difficult to solve. So I think it's really easy in some ways to kind of say, man, homelessness, education, affordable housing, mental health, like these huge macro level issues, what can we do? And I think for me, like what we've been able to see that's encouraging, to go back to your actual question, is to say, like, yes, it does take a whole lot, like hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even more than that, and like policy level issues at the state and federal level but we can still do stuff. We can actually get involved and like build partnerships among church, business, nonprofit, and government partners at a neighborhood school that's going to help that school retain its teachers, keep making progress on educational metrics, and just create safety for families who live in an under-resourced and perhaps unsafe neighborhood. If we can do that, like neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, we don't need to wait for the policy level issues. We don't need to wait for the hundreds of millions of dollars to drop in. We can just do what we can right here. And so churches are one of the largest landholders of excess undeveloped land in our state. Could we perhaps incentivize a church who's sitting on a piece of undeveloped land for the last 20 years, not really sure what to do with it? Could we incentivize them to contribute a portion of that land towards an affordable housing project that just makes it slightly easier for that developer to bring something to market for families that are living at 30% of area median income? Well, the answer to that question is yes. The bigger challenge is, how do we do that at scale? How do we do that statewide? How do we do that, in a whole region? Like, somebody else has got to figure that out. But I think that, like, if we can just start thinking about, like, what can I do now with my group of people, a group of partners in a specific neighborhood, then I think we actually, in my experience, we've started to see some real needles move. So I do think that there's opportunities to be encouraged by doing small things, even if at large, at the national level, it can be hard to be positive about some of these challenges.
One of the ideas that came out of a conversation with you and some other folks, and it may have been your idea or somebody else's, but was, all right, the church has all these resources used on Sunday. One of the biggest problems, including with me, my family, my siblings, is we need safe daycares. Mm-hmm. We need safe places that we trust to leave our kids. And when we were in Texas, our daycare was through this church, and it was incredible. I mean, they're teaching you, if you believe in faith, they're teaching your kids about faith, their alignment with your core values and your morals, they're educating them, right? It's not just a daycare, it's kind of this kind of school where you feel like, hey, the kids are going to be reaffirmed in the things we're doing. And you've got all these empty churches Monday through Friday, and all these parents that are like, man, I can't find a place to drop my kids so that I can focus on, generating income to provide for my family. I think that's a home run idea. And I hope somebody is able to start moving that forward, because once again, I just keep coming back to the stewardship concept. As a church, are we taking these assets that have been gifted to us, that God has us stewarding, whether it be a piece of raw land or a building, are we stewarding that well? And 9 times out of 10, I'm like, no, if this building's sitting vacant and we have utility that could be utilized for the community, we should figure out a way to do that. Now, there's tons of parameters around that, but it's also capitalism. Like, I'm hoping some free market guy or gal says, hey, how do I lease all those churches and make money doing that and provide a way better daycare solution at a way lower cost, because the churches are willing to somehow, give me a fair market rate. So anyways, I think there's some incredible ideas coming out of these tables that you're generating. And I'm curious about a little different of a question. So I think COVID made it very difficult for people to remember how to build community. I'm seeing this as a pattern with my team members, with business partners, with people in our small group in church. We've kind of been, my wife and I have said, hey, we're always going to be magnetizing people and be a safe space for just everybody to come and hang out together. But I'm not seeing that a lot. I'm seeing a lot of people very isolated, where we might meet a couple at the soccer game, and I'm, start talking to them. Hey, who do you hang out? Who are your friends? What's your church group? And it's like, we really don't have any of that. And it's kind of been a since a COVID thing. So how do we start rebuilding community? And let's shrink it. I like how you're saying, hey, let's not maybe focus on national and maybe some of the bigger problems, but how do we do this in our neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is, pre-COVID, like you've got kids, pre-COVID, like my kids were about your kids' ages. So my kids were like middle school down to elementary school. And so, pre-COVID, I would say a lot of us as parents, as families, we felt busy, right? And like sports and school activities and like all of these things. And I can't speak to the lived experience of like a single person at that time of that era. But we just felt, as families, we just felt busy. So for me, like one of the beautiful things about COVID was I was forced to not be busy. I'm working out of my home. My kids aren't going like 90 miles an hour doing all these different activities. We could just kind of be unbusy together. And it felt really sweet. And there was this kind of common sense of like, whenever everything kind of clears out again, I just don't want to go back to being busy again. And that lasted for about like 3 months. Because then we went back to just being busy, and we were also still kind of collectively as a society, we were just tired, right? So we not only went back to being busy, but now we're also tired and busy. And so I've just felt like people have, myself included, like we've just gone back to being busy. And there's a sense in which like being busy is definitely better than being bored. Like you and I have talked about that. I'd much rather be busy than bored. I don't want to sit around on my thumbs. I want to be a good steward of my time and my resources. But I think that busyness and that tiredness has just left us like when we have free time, there's so many people that are like, they just want to sit back. They just want to flip the TV on and they just want to kind of chill within their own kind of safe group of people, oftentimes their family or, spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, significant other, whatever. So I think for us, what we have experienced, and this is both pre-COVID, it's become even more true since COVID, is I think one of the ways that we can help kind of draw people together, draw people out, and then draw them together is through some sort of common mission. So this is why I still believe, even though people can get critical about it, I still believe in the value of like these big citywide days of service that we do, where it just introduces people to an organization, whether it's a school or it's a nonprofit organization that solves some problem in our city or addresses some problem. Can they just get out and for a few hours on a Saturday morning with a bunch of other people, 10 or 15 or 20 other people, could they find themselves at a place where they can just be helpful for just a small window of time and start to discover 2 or 3 other people that also care about that same thing? So we just had it a couple weeks ago. This happened across 96 different service locations, but an easy one to kind of talk about is like the foster care system. So for anybody who cares about foster care, they can show up to an organization for 3 hours on a Saturday morning and, paint a room that's there for respite care for foster families or organize the clothing closet for the families who come and pick up a foster kid. They can just do something that's helpful, and they can find themselves alongside 2 or 3 other people who also care about the foster care system, but maybe just don't have the capacity to be a foster parent in that stage of life. And that just starts to build this sense of this common mission, starts to build hey, like we care about the same thing. Let's keep coming back and care about the same thing together next month, and then the next month after that. So I think that sense of common mission can really kind of draw people together. It gives people a reason to come out beyond just building relationship for relationship's sake. I think we can do that in neighborhoods. We care about our neighborhood together. Let's get together and talk about how we can make this neighborhood a better place. We care about that school that's down the street. So whatever that common mission is, I think has an opportunity to really draw people together in ways that I think we've missed out on since COVID.
For sure. What are you most excited about for next year? Like as you think, we're kind of winding down 2025. It was a fast year for us. I was like, wow, we're already almost in November. What's really got you excited about what you're working on or things in the community for next year?
Yeah, actually, I'm really thankful, and this was not in the script, but you mentioned the whole early child care issue. You mentioned it, Chris. We've got dormant spaces in churches, across our community, all over the place. There's some real policy challenges around the regulation of an actual child care facility, a licensed child care facility that is different than a church that provides its own daycare for kids during their weekend services. At the same time, those buildings have an incredible opportunity to alleviate some of the pressure that our early child care system, it's our biggest economic development barrier in Colorado Springs. In other words, like employers are not able to hire adequate employees because those employees can't find affordable places for their kids to be taken care of during the workday. So it's a real challenge that we've got to figure out, but there's movement Man, I'm on a Zoom call tomorrow with some folks at the Denver State Capitol. I'm working with some local legislators as well as just kind of people across these different sectors to say, how do we figure this out together? And I would love to think that by this time next year, if not before then, we've actually created some policy, maybe some shifts. I won't say change, like dramatic changes, but maybe some shifts that open up the market so that these churches can offer childcare spaces both to businesses in the childcare space that are trying to scale up, as well as to families that are trying to find somewhere in their neighborhood that they can trust their children with while they go to work. So I'm excited about that. There's a lot of things that have to get sorted out, but I think that's the next thing that the church can really leverage. It doesn't even have to do dollars. Church doesn't have to write the check. Can they just open up their space? And the question is, can our policy leaders allow them to do that in ways that they have to accommodate for the life, health, and safety of the occupants? And I believe that. But we can also do some things that leverage just these dormant spaces that the church has to offer. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities there. I also think that there's so many great opportunities for churches and businesses to work together on just leveraging their resources towards employment opportunities. I mean, we've got people in churches all over the place that are coming out of broken stories. And can we just develop enough trust with some of our business leaders to say, hey, we'll take care of them after hours, or we'll take care of some of those personal things. If you guys can give them a hiring opportunity, we'll take care of the personal side, you take care of the employment side, and let's see if we can do that together. So I just think there's all kinds of opportunities in that kind of thing.
I love it, man. All right, so we've got about 5 or so more minutes. I want to, first of all, I oftentimes forget to let people know where they can find you. So let's stop. And if somebody's excited to get involved with 'Cause I Love You or just connect with you and share a table with you, what's the best place they can connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, easily our website, which we say 'Cause I Love You, it's spelled COS and then the words iloveyou.com, is just an easy way to get a hold of us, to be able to find our work. I think, if I can just be a little bit forward and just say, like, we're coming in towards kind of the year-end fundraising cycle. There's a lot of people that are out there like pitching for donors and that kind of thing, which we certainly are and we will be. At the same time, I'm looking for people who want to invest in the future of our city. I think that what we're trying to build is thinking about, future solutions, future ideas, future opportunities. And it's great to be able to provide. We work with so many good organizations in our city who are providing helps for people right here, right now. Food, shelter, clothing, assistance of all different kinds. We don't do that kind of work. What we do is try to build these opportunities, these platforms, these events, these engagements that allow for that trust to be built. That takes a long time. And I think the people who are going to come alongside our work are interested in kind of investing in what the future of our city could look like. So all that's at CauseILoveYou.com.
I love it, man. Okay, so if you could share a tool, a book, a resource, a podcast, something that has absolutely changed your life over the past 3 to 6 months, something more relevant, more recent. What's something that you're like, man, this has just been great?
Yeah, so many good things. I mean, I think about, there's a great book out there by a guy named David John Seal called Network Power. And we have really been kind of shifting our model towards this network idea, as opposed to 'Cause I Love You being some sort of hub at the center of this gigantic wheel. Can we just resource these different partners who want to do the same kind of work together, again, around so many of these issues that I've talked about over the last few minutes? So that idea of building what he calls dense networks of trust around a common mission. I think that's a great book and it's a great resource. The other thing that I would mention, and this is older than the last 3 to 6 months, but it's so helpful and it's kind of the backdrop of a lot of the things that I've talked about earlier on in the podcast, is this idea of centered set versus bounded set approaches. Bounded set approaches tend to think, if you're kind of inside the cattle fence, so to speak, then we can work together. Centered set is really like thinking about like the cattle well. Chris, you're from Texas. You know a lot about cattle. If you've got a cattle well, the cattle will come from wherever they are. It doesn't matter how far or how close they are. We just want them to come to that common centered set, this idea of what do we have in common? And I think that centered set approach has really changed a lot of how we see our ability to draw all these different partners from these different sectors together. So centered set versus bounded set. If somebody's listening to this, wants to go research that, they would find a lot that informs some of the work that we do.
Love it. Okay, so in closing, I want you to share some optimism and some wisdom. I think it's easy. So this podcast is generally focused on entrepreneurs and business owners or people that want to get into that space. I believe business owners will have the highest impact in society over the next 20, 30, 40 years. I just think that's why we call ourselves capitalist missionaries. I just think resources are there, understanding is there, processes are there. But if you're a business owner and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, there's just so much stuff that's not working. There's so many things going against me. How would you give them some wisdom and encouragement for how they could integrate their business and impact and really start combining those?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things to say to that, but the reality, I think where I just start, and this sounds so cliche, I've just seen it work over and over and over again, is just start small and start simple with what you've got. So I'll just go back to the foster care system. If somebody's listening to this and they really have a heart for the foster care system, maybe they came out of that system, maybe they have an aspiration to be a foster family, or maybe they're just like, hey, this is a thing in our community that needs to be addressed. It's really easy to look at a problem like the foster care system and just see all the brokenness, all the holes, all the policy mishaps, like all of the negativity, and just think, I don't even know what to do about that. Or you can just say, hey, like maybe the 2 or 3 employees on my very small team that's just trying to get something off the ground, maybe once a month, we could just offer to show up and volunteer for 3 hours on a Friday afternoon at the end of our work week once a month at that nearby foster care agency that just needs a little bit of help. And we can just ask them, what can we do? Or there's some, small little, fundraising thing, or, 2% of your initial profits. Like, it doesn't have to be big. Just start with something really, really small and just allow that to grow. And it could grow into something massive, or you could just keep on doing that same small thing for the next 2 or 5 or 10 years and just watch the fruit kind of come from it. I just know that sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, it's just so easy to feel like, well, I can't really move the needle, so I'm just going to kind of wait until I can. Mm-hmm. And I have just seen so many times we could fill up a whole nother podcast and I could just tell story after story after story of this real estate agent, this small manufacturing firm, this tech company, this startup that just says, hey, we've got a heart for this. What can we do? And then they just start there. And I just think there is so much profound work that can come from starting simple, starting small, and staying the course.
I love it, man. Stu, thanks so much for coming on the show. We'll have to have you back on. You're always a blast and an encouragement, and we'll catch up with you down the road.
Man, that sounds great. Can't wait.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.